Hello everybody, welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabazz Dad. As ever, I am the IT Geek. Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode within the AZ700 Designing and Implementing Microsoft Azure Network Solutions Exam Study Guide series. And as ever, I've been joined by Mohammed Sajid, not right now within the recording, but he's going to be later on in the recording. He's going to recorded a few demos. We will be back recording hopefully in the next few weeks, just again scheduling issues, as you can understand. But yeah, we started module 2 in the last episode, and we're back. We're continuing with that. So I think we looked at sort of VNets and subnetting and sort of those beginner sort of areas of core networking solutions. So let's get started with this episode. So as I mentioned, we have made a start on module 2, which is design and implement core network infrastructure. And we are continuing with the designing and implementing private IP addressing for VNets topic. This is part 2 of it. So we're going to talk about creating a prefix for public IP addresses. We'll look at when to use that public IP address prefix, and then we'll talk about planning and implementing a custom public IP address. And Sad is going to take us through a demo of creating a prefix for a public IP address. So that topic I'll leave to Saj. I won't talk about it. I won't steal Saj's thunder, as it were. So let's start off by talking about choosing when to use a public address prefix. So public networks like the internet communicate by using public IP addresses. Private networks like your Azure virtual network use private IP addresses, and which are not routable. They're private, so they're not routable to any public networks. To support a network that exists both in Azure on premises, you must configure IP addressing for both types of networks. In Azure Resource Manager, a public IP address is a resource that has its own sort of properties. Some of the resources can be associated with a public IP address resource within a virtual machine, network interface, public load balancers, Azure Firewall, those sort of services. Public IP addresses are created with an IPv4 or an IPv6 address, which can be either static or dynamic. So we talk about specifically a dynamic public IP address. This is assigned to an address that can change over a lifespan of the Azure resource. So dynamic IP address is allocated when you create or start a VM. The IP address is then released when you stop or delete that VM. In each Azure region, public IP addresses are assigned from a unique pool of addresses, and the default location method is dynamic. Let's talk about static public IP addresses now, so we can see the difference. And this is assigned as an address that will not change over the lifespan of the Azure resource. So to ensure that IP address for the resource remains the same, set the allocation method explicitly to static on the IP address. In this case, the IP address is assigned immediately. It is released only when you delete the resource or you change the IP allocation to dynamic. So for public IP addresses, there are two types of SKUs as well. You can choose from basic or standard, and all. We'll talk about those shortly. And all public IP addresses created before the introduction of SKUs are basic SKU public IP addresses. With the introduction of SKUs, you have the option to specify which SKU you would like for your public IP address. So let's stick to this topic of public IP address prefixes. I mentioned basic SKU. And basic SKU public IP addresses can be assigned by using static or dynamic allocation methods. Basic IPs have an adjustable inbound originated flow idle timeout, and that's of anything between 4 and 30 minutes. So they've got an adjustable inbound originated flow idle timeout of 4 to 30 minutes. And the default is 4 minutes, and the fixed outbound originated flow idle timeout of 4 minutes. So the default's 4, and the fixed outbound originated flow timeout is also 4 minutes. So you need to remember that could be in the exam. Basic IPs are open by default, so use NSG's network security groups is recommended, but optional for restricting that inbound and outbound traffic. And they do not support availability zone scenarios, so that's very important. You must use a standard SKU public IP for an availability zone scenario. So that could be a gotcha in the exam, so do keep an eye out for that. Let's talk about standard SKUs now. So standard SKU public IP address always use that static allocation method, okay, with a standard SKU. Always uses static only. They have, similar to the basic, they have that adjustable inbound originated flow idle timeout of up to between 4 and 30 minutes. default value is 4 minutes, and that fixed outbound originated flow idle timeout is also 4 minutes. So exactly the same as the basic. Standard IPs are secure by default and closed to inbound traffic with standard SKUs. You must explicitly allow inbound traffic by using a network security group, NSG. And then standard IPs can be assigned to network interfaces, standard public load balancers, application gateways or VPN gateways. And standard IPs are zone redundant by default as well, and optionally zonal. So let's move on to talk about planning and implementing a custom public IP. So a custom IP address prefix is a contiguous range of IP addresses owned by an external customer and provisioned into a subscription. The range is owned by the customer, and the Microsoft are permitted to advertise that range. There are 3 states which you find with public IP addresses. So when a custom prefix is either provisioned, commissioning, or in a commissioned state, a linked public IP prefix can be created, either as a subnet of the custom IP prefix range or the entire range. Public IP prefix can be derived from a custom IP prefix in another subscription as well, with the appropriate permissions using Azure PowerShell or Azure Portal. Sticking to the planning implementing custom public IP topic, if the provision range is being advertised to the internet by another network, it's important to plan the migration to Azure to avoid sort of unplanned outages. Regardless of the method used, make the transition during a maintenance window. It's always a best practice. One method is you can create a public IP address prefix, public IP address from the prefixes when the custom IP prefix is in a provision state. So one method of migration is to create public IP prefixes and public IP addresses from the prefixes when the custom IP prefix is provision state. Method 2, another method, is to create public IP address prefixes and public IP addresses from the prefixing using Microsoft ranges. Deploying an infrastructure in your subscription and verify its operations then. To view custom IP prefixes, you can use PowerShell or Azure CLI. And all public prefixes are created under the custom prefix. All of them will all be displayed. So now I'm going to hand over to Mohammed Sajid again to do another demo. So thank you, Saj, and over to you.
Thank you, Shabazz. So Shabazz is looking at public IP prefixes. So to create a public IP prefix, just search for prefix. And then you have custom IP prefixes, but you want to select public IP prefixes. In here, again, just save us typing a bit, we'll copy the name. And we'll create it in number 3. So if you select create, fairly easy to create. So you say subscription, select the subscription that you want. We'll stick with our default subscription. Resource group, again, we'll select our test resource group for the AZ700 environment. You can create a new one if you need to, give it a name. The name needs to be unique. And the region, so if you don't want to put in UK South, which is what this is defaulting to, you could pick a different region. We'll stick with UK South. If you notice here, the SKU is standard. Then you have the options changing IP version to IPv4, IPv6. We'll stick with IPv4. And the prefix owner, either custom IP prefix or Microsoft own. So we'll stay with Microsoft own as part of this demo. And then you have this option of prefix sizes. By default, it defaults to /28, which gives you 16 contiguous IP addresses. But as you can see, you have /29, which gives you 8, /30, which gives you 4, and /31, which gives you 2. We'll stick with the default. And then you can have this across availability zones to make it zone redundant. And you have 3 availability zones in UK South. So you can put it onto one of the zones or leave it as zone redundant. We'll select the default option. Again, if you're using tags, you can define them here. We're not using any in the current environment. Select review. Once you're happy with what you've defined, select create. And this will take just a few moments. And it's done. So not yet, give it a minute. There you go. You can go to your resource and review your resource. And you now have subnet delegation, IP prefix 20.49.219.0/28. So 16 contiguous IP addresses. And it's zone redundant, so it's zone 1, 2, and 3 in the UK South region. Thank you for watching. Back to you, Shabazz.
Thanks, Saj, for that. Another really, really interesting demo. This time we talk about creating a prefix of public IP address. So again, really, really interesting topic. And obviously, we covered a lot of public IP addressing in this episode. And again, if you want to follow that lab yourself, you can find it in the link to the GitHub labs in the description. So yeah, thank you again for watching. I believe that is, if I'm not mistaken, yeah. So that was a two-part episode or two-part topic around implementing private IP addressing for VNets. We're going to start talking about name resolution again, another two-part topic in the next episodes. So again, any comments, any likes, obviously, and please do subscribe. Hit me on my Twitter, on my LinkedIn, and mine and Saj's are both in the description. Let us know what you think. Give us any feedback, obviously, and like I said, please do subscribe. So up until next time, thank you and goodbye.